A crumpled $5 bill slid across the table and stopped in front of her like a fragile question, one that asked who she really was when no one was supposed to be watching. Some moments define us. Not the grand gestures we rehearse or the performances we put on when everyone's watching, but the small, unguarded moments when we think no one is paying attention. Those are the moments that reveal who we truly are. And sometimes those moments change everything. On a cold Tuesday evening in November, a man worth over $3 billion walked into a diner in Charleston, South Carolina. He wasn't there for the food. He wasn't there to network or be seen. He was there to conduct a test he'd been running for years, ever since the one person who truly knew him was gone. He would leave a $5 tip, sit in his car across the street, and watch. He wanted to see what people did when they thought no one was looking. He wanted to see if kindness still existed in a world that had shown him nothing but greed. What happened next didn't just surprise him. It shattered everything he thought he knew about people. It made him question his entire legacy. And by the time that night was over, he would make a decision that would rewrite his will and change the life of a woman who had no idea she was being tested at all. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something important. If stories like this mean something to you, if they remind you of values that seem to be disappearing from our world, then please hit that subscribe button right now. You see, we're a small channel trying to bring back real stories about real values, kindness, integrity, gratitude, the things our parents and grandparents taught us. But YouTube's algorithm doesn't care about values. It only cares about numbers. And without your subscription, stories like Sariah's will never reach the people who need to hear them most. So if you believe these stories matter, if you want to be part of keeping this kind of content alive, subscribe now. It takes 2 seconds, costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Now let's begin. Luke Stephenson wasn't always cynical. There was a time when he believed in people, when he saw the good in humanity, when he trusted that kindness was real and not just a transaction. But that was before his wife died. That was before he learned that most people in his life weren't there for him, they were there for his money. 3 years earlier, Catherine had passed away after a short but brutal fight with cancer. She was the only person who had known him before the billions, before the empire, before the carefully constructed walls he built around himself. She was the only one who called him out when he was wrong, who laughed at his jokes, not because he was powerful, but because she genuinely found him funny. And when she died, she took the last piece of his humanity with her. In the months that followed, Luke watched as people circled him like vultures. Distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in decades suddenly remembered his birthday. Employees who used to barely acknowledge him now laughed too loudly at his meetings. Even his own children, grown and distant, only called when they needed something. He started to wonder if anyone in his life actually cared about him, or if they just cared about what he represented. That's when he started testing people. It began small. He'd drop his wallet in public and see if anyone returned it. He'd ask for directions and see if strangers were patient or dismissive. And then he developed his favorite test, the $5 tip. He would go to diners, cafes, and restaurants always alone, always dressed down. He'd order a full meal, engage politely with the server, and then leave exactly $5 on the table. Not because he was cheap, Luke could buy the entire restaurant without blinking, but because he wanted to see their reaction. Would they curse under their breath, roll their eyes, complain to their coworkers, or would they simply accept it with grace? In 2 years, he had run this test 43 times across 12 different states. 43 times he had been disappointed, until that Tuesday night in Charleston, until he met Sariah Johns. The diner was called Maggie's Place, a small family-owned establishment tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down pharmacy. The sign outside flickered, the booths inside were patched with duct tape, and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked since 1997. But the food was warm, the coffee was strong, and the people who worked there treated you like family. Sariah had been working at Maggie's for almost 6 years. She was 34 years old, a single mother, and she was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Every morning she woke up at 5, got her 9-year-old son ready for school, dropped him off, and went straight to her shift. She worked until 3, picked him up, helped with homework, made dinner, and then headed back for the evening shift that ended at 11. On good weeks she got Sundays off, on bad weeks she worked 14 days straight, but you wouldn't know any of this by looking at her. Sariah had a smile that could light up a room. She had a way of making people feel seen, even when she was running on 3 hours of sleep and her feet were screaming. She remembered regulars' orders, asked about their families, and never let anyone leave Maggie's without feeling like they mattered. It wasn't an act, it was just who she was. Her grandmother had raised her that way. "Baby," she used to say, "the world's gonna try to make you hard, don't let it. Kindness is the only thing they can't take from you." That night, when Luke walked in just after 7, Sariah was in the middle of a rush. The diner was packed, the kitchen was backed up, and her feet were already aching. But when she saw him standing by the door looking a little lost, she smiled. "Evening, sir. Sit anywhere you like." "I'll be right with you." He chose a booth in the corner, away from the crowd. She noticed he didn't pull out his phone. He just sat there, watching the room with eyes that looked both sharp and sad. When she finally made it to his table, she pulled out her notepad and met his gaze. "Long day?" she asked. He seemed surprised by the question. "You could say that." "Well, you're in the right place then. Coffee first?" He nodded. She brought him a cup, hot and black, and didn't rush him to order. She checked on him twice before he was ready, and when he finally ordered the chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and green beans, she wrote it down and said, "Good choice." "That's my son's favorite too." Luke watched her throughout the meal. She moved through the diner like a dancer, balancing plates, refilling drinks, and cracking jokes with the cook. She diffused a complaint from a cranky customer with such grace that the man ended up laughing. She slipped a free slice of pie to an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday and always ordered the same thing. And every time she passed his table, she checked if he needed anything, not in a hovering way, but in a way that made him feel cared for. When he finished eating, she cleared his plate and asked if he wanted dessert. He declined. She left the check, folded neatly on the table, and told him to take his time. Luke pulled out his wallet. The bill was $18.60. He left a $20 bill and, as he always did, a $5 tip underneath it. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and walked toward the door. But he didn't leave. He stood just outside under the flickering sign and waited. Sariah returned to the table a few minutes later. She picked up the 20, rang it into the register, and came back with the change. That's when she saw the $5 bill tucked under the edge of the plate. She stared at it for a moment. $5 for an hour of service, for kindness, for care. Most people would have been frustrated. Most people would have felt insulted. Sariah just picked up the bill, folded it carefully, and slipped it into her apron. Then she whispered something so quietly that no one in the diner could hear her. But Luke, standing just outside the window, heard every word. "Thank you, Lord. Someone gave what they could tonight. Bless them wherever they are." Luke felt something crack inside his chest. He had expected bitterness. He had expected disappointment. He had expected her to complain to a coworker or shake her head in frustration. But she didn't. She was grateful, not because the tip was big, but because someone had given it all. He stood there for a long moment, staring through the glass, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. And then, before he could stop himself, he walked back inside. If this part makes sense, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching this far. Sariah looked up when the door chimed. She saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, looking almost uncomfortable. "Did you forget something, sir?" she asked. He walked over to her station slowly. "I need to ask you something." She set down the coffee pot she was holding. "Of course. What can I help you with?" He hesitated, which was unusual for him. Luke Stephenson never hesitated. "That tip I left, it was small." "Most people would be upset, but you weren't. Why?" Sariah blinked, surprised by the question. Then she smiled, a little confused but still warm. "Upset? Why would I be upset? Because it wasn't much. You worked hard." "You deserved more." She shook her head gently. "Sir, a tip is a gift. It's not required. It's something extra, something kind. Whether it's $1 or 100, if someone chooses to leave it, I'm grateful." Luke studied her face, looking for the crack, the performance, the angle. "There was none. What if I told you I could have left more, a lot more?" She laughed softly, not unkindly. "Then that's between you and God, sir. My job isn't to judge what people can or can't afford. My job is to treat people with kindness no matter what." He felt the crack in his chest widen. "That's it. That's your philosophy." "That's it," she said simply. "Life's hard enough. I'm not gonna make it harder by being bitter over things I can't control." Luke didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, he was speechless. "Can I ask you something now?" Sariah said. He nodded. Why does it matter so much to you? About the tip, I mean. He could have lied, he could have walked away, but something in her eyes made him want to tell the truth. Because I've been testing people, he admitted, for 2 years. I leave small tips to see how they react, to see if kindness is real or just an act people put on. Sariah's expression softened. And what did you find? Disappointment every single time. Until tonight. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something, sir? Please. Kindness isn't about what you get back. It's about who you choose to be when no one's watching. And if you've been testing people, maybe you've been looking in the wrong places, or maybe you've been looking for the wrong thing." Luke felt tears prick his eyes. He hadn't cried since Catherine's funeral. He cleared his throat, nodded, and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he stopped. "What's your name?" Sariah Johns." "Thank you, Sariah." "For what?" "For reminding me what I forgot." Luke didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room, staring at the wall, replaying the conversation in his mind. He thought about his life, about the empire he'd built, about the money he'd accumulated, about the will he'd written, dividing his fortune between children who barely spoke to him and charities he'd never visited. And he realized something that made his stomach turn. He had spent 2 years testing people for kindness, but he hadn't been kind himself in just as long. He had been so focused on finding goodness in others that he'd stopped practicing it himself. Sariah hadn't just passed his test. She had held up a mirror and he didn't like what he saw. The next morning, Luke made a phone call to his lawyer. "I need to rewrite my will." "Again, Mr. Stephenson?" "Yes, immediately." Within a week, the changes were made. He didn't tell anyone, he didn't announce it. He simply rewrote his legacy. And then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went back to Maggie's. Sariah was wiping down tables when she saw him walk in. She recognized him immediately and smiled. "Well, look who's back. Chicken fried steak again?" He shook his head. "Actually, I came to talk to you. Do you have a minute?" She glanced at her manager, who nodded. She sat down across from him, curious but not worried. Luke reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I need you to read this." "What is it?" "Just read it, please." Sariah opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, typed on law firm letterhead. As she read, her hands began to shake. The letter explained that Luke Stephenson, founder and CEO of Stephenson Industries, had amended his will. He had established a trust in her name. The trust included a fully paid home in a safe neighborhood with good schools, a lifetime medical fund for any family member who needed it, a college fund for her son that would cover tuition, room, board, and books at any university in the country, and a donation of $500,000 to Maggie's Place to be used for employee bonuses, benefits, and retirement funds. Sariah looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't understand." "You reminded me what wealth is actually for," Luke said quietly. "You reminded me that kindness isn't a transaction, that people can still be good even when life isn't fair to them. That gratitude doesn't depend on what you have, it depends on who you are." "But sir, I can't accept this. I didn't do anything to deserve." "You did everything," he interrupted. "You treated a stranger with dignity. You chose gratitude over bitterness, and you did it when you had every reason not to. That's worth more than anything I've ever built." Sariah covered her mouth, trying not to sob. "Why? Because my wife used to tell me that the true measure of wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give to people who can't pay you back. I forgot that. You reminded me." She cried then, fully and openly. And for the first time in 3 years, so did Luke. 6 months later, Sariah moved into her new home with her son. It was a 3-bedroom house with a backyard and a porch swing. Her son's room had a desk, a bookshelf, and posters of his favorite basketball players. She still worked at Maggie's, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because kindness wasn't something you turned off when life got easier. It was something you carried with you no matter what. Luke visited once a month, not as a billionaire checking on an investment, but as a friend sharing a meal. He laughed more. He listened more. And slowly, he started to rebuild the parts of himself he thought he'd lost forever. He also changed how he ran his business. He started paying attention to the people who worked for him, not just the numbers they produced. He established scholarship funds, employee relief programs, and mentorship initiatives. He stopped testing people and started trusting them. And when he eventually passed away, 5 years later, his will reflected the man he'd become, not the man he used to be. Half of his fortune went to individuals and families like Sariah, people who had shown him kindness when they had nothing to gain. The other half funded programs that supported working families, single parents, and community spaces like Maggie's Place. His children contested the will. They lost, because Luke had made sure every word was ironclad, and at the reading of the will, his lawyer read a final letter Luke had written, addressed to anyone who questioned his choices. It said, "Wealth is not measured by what you accumulate. It's measured by what you give to people who cannot repay you. If you're reading this and you're angry, ask yourself, when was the last time you were kind to someone who couldn't do anything for you?" Because that's the only question that matters. Sometimes we spend our whole lives searching for meaning in the wrong places. We look for it in success, in recognition, in wealth, in power. But meaning doesn't live in those places. It lives in the moments when we choose to be kind, even when it's hard. When we choose gratitude, even when life isn't fair. When we choose to see people, really see them, not for what they can give us, but for who they are. Sariah Johns didn't know she was being tested that night. She didn't know a billionaire was watching her. She was just being herself. And that's the point. The truest version of who we are shows up when no one's watching. When there's no reward, when there's no audience, that's when character reveals itself. So here's the question: who are you when no one's watching? Are you kind when it's inconvenient? Are you grateful when life is hard? Do you see people, or do you see what they can do for you? Because one day someone might be watching, and that moment might change everything. Not just for them, but for you too. Now, before you go, I need to be honest with you. We pour our hearts into creating these stories, stories that remind us of the values we grew up with, the kindness our parents taught us, and the integrity that seems harder and harder to find these days. But here's the truth. Without your help, this channel won't survive. YouTube doesn't promote channels like ours unless people like you, people who care about these messages, actually subscribe, share, and engage. And I know you're busy. I know you've got a million things going on, but think about this. How many channels are out there actually trying to bring back decency? How many are telling stories that make you feel something real, something that matters? If this story touched you, if it reminded you of something important, then please don't just watch and leave. Hit that subscribe button right now. It's free. It takes 2 seconds. And it tells YouTube that content like this deserves to be seen. Then share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your sister, your friend from church, your old coworker, anyone who still believes kindness matters, and leave a comment. Tell us what this story meant to you. Tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, or a time you showed it to someone else. Because when you comment, you're not just helping us, you're building a community of people who still believe in doing the right thing. We've made it easy for you. All you have to do is click. But if you don't, if you just watch and scroll away, then stories like Sariah's will disappear. And that would be a shame. Because the world needs more Sariahs, and it needs more people willing to share their story. So please, if you're still with me, if this mattered to you, subscribe now. Share it now. Comment now. Don't wait. Because tomorrow you'll forget, and this message will be buried under 1,000 other videos that don't mean half as much. Do it for Sariah. Do it for the values you believe in. Do it because you know deep down that this is the kind of content the world needs more of. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And thank you in advance for subscribing and sharing. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, kindness is never wasted.